Hello everyone, how you guys all doing? Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Today we're here with another video, and today's video will be looking back on raids items in old school RuneScape. Now there's a lot to explain here, and I'm going to try to do as best as I can with this. Basically, raids are something that was introduced into the game at the beginning of the year, January. So been about 8 or 9 months now, and we kind of have a lot of information now. Basically, raids are the next tier content within the game. They were a really big step, and basically you can expect more of this in the future, so be prepared. The way games like this work and games like RuneScape is if they're willing to introduce something like raids that improves content for certain things, they'll eventually do it for others. And with that said, over time, we'll see new and better items come into the game that'll be worth a ton. So what we're going to be doing today is looking over the graphs and trends that we saw with a majority of these items, and I'll be analyzing what info you guys can take away from the charts and graphs that we see today and employ those upon new items that enter the game in the future. Now, while this may seem strange at first, because to the regular person you wouldn't assume that the way raids items go is necessarily the way most items will go, that is true. However, for the most part, these do show some really good trends as far as what the community thinks whenever an item starts to drop, if they panic sell, if they buy, and really just the way stuff bounces back. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and show you guys today. Along with that, I plan on telling you guys a decent amount of tips as to what to look for when you are actually buying and investing into these items. As you guys can see here, I have 3 Dragon Claws on me. I'm invested in those. I spent 215 mil on it. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys about what I do when I see these items. Alright, and here we are with the first item. This is the Kodai wand, currently 118 mil, which is actually really impressive that it held such a good value over this long of time. So if we go ahead and look back, I lost a ton of money at the beginning of Kodai wands because I tried flipping them. That's my own fault. We're not going to talk about that, but what we will be talking about is kind of analyzing what the graph says here. Now, within 3 weeks of having the Kodai wand out and it hitting 88 mil, it seemed like a pretty much like, you know, almost for certain type of merch, because 88 mil for the new best mage item in the game that people still want to use. There's uses for mage. It's obviously going to go back up, and it did. But then to hit 60 mil, I thought at the time was astounding, and this is what we have to be careful of in this instance, is that a lot of times whenever people start to see an item drop, especially if it's a decently new item, people pile on and just start selling, just mass selling the item because they're scared. They don't know what it's worth, and that's the one thing that you really need to be able to try to make up for yourself. So as you guys can see here, Kodai wand hit 60 mil. 60 mil for the best weapon in the game as far as maging is concerned is actually just, I mean, it's insane. But you also have to consider the fact that raids are so hard to do. Like, while 60 mil may seem like a lot for maybe a good item, like you could be like, oh, well, I mean, a whip's one of the best melee items in the game, but it's only 1.5 to 2 mil. Well, that's because it's a lot easier to go and kill some abyssal demons, and people do it in general just because they have to for Slayer. With something like this, you're going out of your way literally just to make money, and this money-making method has to be better than Zulrah because it requires so much out of you. It requires so much knowledge as far as the minigame's concerned, and it requires so much knowledge in form of the game itself. So that naturally is going to make this money-making method a lot better. So while we know Zulrah can be upwards of 2 mil an hour, you also have to take into account that raid should then be at least 3 mil plus, and at the time it was around 4 to 5. So items really can't fall like this, especially really high-priced items. Like, I think a lot of items with raids have held their value really well because of the fact that Zulrah is such a good money-making method that you almost have to keep these items at high prices, or else people aren't going to go and do raids. Now, as far as why this item actually hit so low and then raised back up all the way, this probably isn't something you could really see. I mean, personally, I think without it, it'd probably be around 70 to 80 mil. But basically what happened during this time was Necreals and Dust Devils became really popular. Slayer tasks just became the only thing you should really be doing. And with that, a lot of high efficiency people obviously are then going to drop the money on a Kodai wand, and on top of that, it had a really high spike whenever the Inferno was released. Really no way to prepare for that, but something that you have to imagine is whatever new content Jagex puts into the game, something like Mage that's going to be insane, you do have to think, what are they going to do to actually make this content useful? Because whenever this came out, Kodai wands and everything like that weren't all that useful in Mage, and so you kind of have to anticipate that they may do something with it. Now on to the one and only Twisted Bow. I can't say I've flipped any of these personally, however, there are some things to learn from here. Basically, right off the bat, we'll say that this weapon was 1. 1.1 mil. I mean, obviously higher upon the day of release, but you know, around that time, 1.1 bill. And that seems like a fairly reasonable price. While it is really, really expensive, and I understand that, if you think about it, it is going to be the best weapon, and it was known at the time it's going to be the best weapon in game at certain bosses, just by far, like without a doubt. And so when you have that, it's obviously going to be worth more than a bill. And I say obviously in quite a strange way, I'm sure, but if you think about it, Elysians used to be 750 mil. If we go back and check their price chart, you guys can see that they actually were 700 mil plus. I mean, before the whole divine thing came out, and before the twisted bow, and before all of that, they were really expensive back here. And if people are willing to pay 733 mil for the best item in game defensively, think how much more they'll be willing to pay for the best item offensively. So with that, even buying a twisted bow at 1.1 bill right off the bat seemed like a really good investment, and obviously it turned out to be as the hype kind of built up over that time and Jagex made various changes with the bow. Now with that said, over time it did hit 1.4 bill, and then there was a huge scare and it dropped to 977 mil. Now I remember that time, that was incredible, but if we keep going, it just kept going back up. And the reason that you have to think about this is, I mean, more and more money is coming into the game every day, and if people are willing to spend 700 mil on the shield, as I said before, obviously it's going to go back up. But the thing is that you have to kind of consider here, there are different highs and lows for this item, obviously, because it has such a high price, and it's really hard to put a price tag on an item that's this rare and that's this good. But ways that you can logically go about doing that is saying, hey, this bow's worth, I mean, at this time probably dipped to 950 mil. If I can get 950 mil for the best item in game, and people used to pay 750 for the best defensive item in game, that let alone is worth it and would have proved to be a really good investment. Now, something you also see here is whenever stuff like this dips really hard, it almost has an immediate comeback. And this is true with a lot of the items here. While it may not be substantial and it may not bounce up hundreds of mils, as you guys can see, July 28th, which was just 2 to 3 weeks ago, you can see that a twisted bow is 867 mil, and that is just absurd. So obviously it was going to go back up, and this is a trend that you see in a lot of graphs with these new raid items. This is how a lot of this stuff just works. The prices on new items are oftentimes made by how people are, like how scared people are, not the actual value of the item. This is just prime example. I mean, obviously at the beginning 150 mil, and then just shoots up extremely, extremely high because people all think that this is going to be some of the best stuff in game. Now over time, this is going to be something that probably you could tell was going to have a bubble, because for the full set, it's just a mage set, and at the time when this is 230, the robe bottoms were probably like 140, the hats like 50. You're paying 400 mil for a set, and not a lot of people in game are willing to pay 400 mil just for a mage set. Now if you consider the Kodai wand as well being 100 mil, or maybe, you know, around there at the time, you're spending 500 mil just on mage gear. And mage isn't even the best form of attack in the game in most places. It obviously has its spots in Slayer, but outside of that, really this gear is pretty useless. With the twisted bow, you have infinite uses for that. That's just insane everywhere. So obviously this was going to drop from 230. Now when it drops from 230 in 2 weeks to 138, that's your time to buy. That's just, it's prime pickings. I mean, but the problem is in that you have to notice this for pretty much every update that comes out and every new item that comes out, is there's going to be, unless something strange happens. The way that most items go is initially they're worth more, and over time they become worth less and less. And so you really have to pick your spots right, and it's hard to really lose if something drops unnecessarily 80 mil within 2 weeks. It's pretty much a guarantee. Just invest into it and it'll go back up, especially an item this good. Now with that said, it's not going to hold that price forever. You do have to dump it at the right point. If you don't do that, you may be stuck with it, and as you guys can see, it'll fall on you. But that's what's going to naturally happen over an 8 to 9 month span in which these items are constantly coming into the game. And this is kind of what makes me think that Dragon Claws right now are a really good investment, but I will talk about their graph as well. Dragon Claws are quite a weird one, and this is something that you would have had to know right off the bat. Obviously, Dragon Claws are going to be an insanely popular item at the beginning, and this is something that, you know, is well understood, I would say, by anyone that was merching it, or at least knew what they were doing in merching it. Dragon Claws are such a throwback item that people are going to want it at the beginning. They're going to want it for YouTube. They're going to want it just to experience what it's like. And with that said, said at the beginning, it's going to be worth an extreme amount because there's a lot of appeal to the item. But after time, I mean, Dragon Claws aren't a practical item outside of PvP, other than maybe being one of the best DPS spec weapons in the game. But I mean, paying 200 to 300 mil for a spec weapon, obviously, what is not something that you plan on doing. Now, with that said, Dragon Claws have seen their fair share of dips and raises during this time. As you guys can see, they did dip originally to 110 mil, then went back up to around 140. This was something that was probably going to happen because if you assume Dragon Claws 3 months in are only 110 mil, that's very easily accessible to a lot of the game. I guess not a majority of players probably, but a decent amount of players have 110 mil and they're willing to spend on it. So that naturally crawled their price back up. However, since then they've been dropping, and even over the last month, as you guys can see, there's been an insane drop. And I mean, most drops I consider to be, you know, decently understandable with Dragon Claws because the item's only worth it for their PvP appeal value, and stuff like AGS takes this natural route too, where at the beginning of the game, it's a really crazy weapon that everyone wants to PK with, so it's going to be really, really expensive at the beginning, but over time it starts to fall. And that, I mean, the D-Claws will in the future be worth less than 70 mil, I will agree on that. However, to be dropping from 91, like a steady 91 for like 3 weeks, and then in the span of 2 weeks, not even, to drop from 90 all the way to 70 mil, I think is absolutely insane. But I think they'll come back, and that's kind of where I employ these strategies. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is quite a weird item, and this is just going to be something that, you know, you gotta figure out yourself. I'll give you all the tips I can for this, and I'll try to explain it to its fullest. Now, we have the Din's Bulwark. Now, this is a really weird item. There was a lot of stuff going on where people thought that this was going to be extremely useful and that there was going to come a time where it would actually have its place in the game. Now that time's come and passed and it's really not useful anymore. People realize DPS is worth it way more than the shield ever would be worth doing anywhere. But one thing that I will say is with stuff like this, be really skeptical. Like right off the bat, you know, really cool item. It was tanky, so people were like, maybe it'll be cool. But over time, you can kind of predict an item that's tanky never really works in RuneScape. It's, I mean, Jagex has had a hard time trying to get defensive items to actually be something that people want and that people are willing to use because they employ it in such a bad strategy. And I think the combat system of the game is partially to be at fault for that. Now with that said, right off the bat, you guys can see this item dips really low from 12.8. It started out over 100 mil, obviously, because it's a new item. It's crazy. People want to try it out, but tips to 12.8 and then has its raise. Now, while it has its rise here, a lot of that was due to the fact that whenever the Inferno came out, people think, well, you know, maybe the Bulwark is going to be useful. Maybe there will be stuff that you'll need this Bulwark for. And that's something that I want to tell you guys is whenever you see an item like this, something like the Bulwark, Jagex put into the game specifically to make it so that this item has a place in the game. And while it is quite weird to talk about because it didn't happen, basically if something's put into the game to have a use, something like this, you would think, you know, Jagex is going to make a use for it. They will put in some sort of content that will make this useful. And while that never happened, really, you can always, whenever you see this item drop really low, you can buy it in the hopes that, you know, at some point maybe there'll be whispers about it. Maybe people will just start to think that at some point Jagex has to put something into the game for it. And while that may not necessarily be true, even if people think it might happen, as you guys can see here, the prices will rise and you'll be able to make money off of it. Now with that said, at this point it's looking pretty poor. To be honest, Jagex hasn't really done much with the Bulwark. They haven't really cared about it. They haven't tried to help it. But it could be something in the future that while it is a 6 mil item now, it's a really hard item to get, and if it ever has a real significant use in the game, it could shoot up to 20 to 30 mil easily, and it would hold that price because they come into the game so seldomly. Alright, so that will be it as far as that goes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Basically, my whole goal of this was to try to tell you guys what I think happens throughout the entirety of these items' lifespan in the market, and just try to make sense of everything that's happened so that you guys have information going forward as far as what you could expect with different items when Jagex eventually releases new content for higher tier players. Now, while that may not be tomorrow, there are good strategies and good tips here that hopefully you guys took in and will be able to employ in the future going forward. But if you guys enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like. If there's anything you want to tell me, make sure to comment down below. If you guys want to show me a little bit of support, subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the clan chat in-game, Large EXP Lamp. Oh god, I gotta join it. There, Large EXP Lamp with 2 E's. Also Twitch, Twitter, Discord, all in the description down below. So, with that said, hopefully you guys have a wonderful day, and peace.